Welcome to this focused explainer covering our January to July 2026 financial data. Now, since you're part of the Board of Trustees or the pastoral staff, I know I don't need to tell you that tracking every single peso isn't just some boring administrative task, it's literally the heartbeat of our faithful stewardship. Today, we're going to totally demystify the numbers from the first 7 months of the year. We're talking celebrating the big wins, unpacking a few unexpected challenges, and facing the structural realities of our church's finances head-on.
Here's how we're going to break this all down. We'll start by looking at our year-to-date financial health, then navigate those cash flow seasonality trends, and really dissect our recent deficits. After that, we'll compare our ministry versus operation spending, clear up a tiny discrepancy from the March ledger, and finally, wrap things up with some solid, actionable strategies for our long-term stability.
All right, let's jump right into our first focus, year-to-date financial health. This is really about uncovering the macro-level truth of where we currently stand. You know, when we get caught up in the day-to-day grind, it is so easy to lose sight of the big picture. But honestly, despite some cash flow volatility that we'll get into in just a minute, the church is actually holding a really strong, positive net surplus of 41,735 pesos and 70 centavos. That number right there, that's our anchor. It proves that fundamentally, our stewardship is sound and the immense generosity of our congregation is actively driving our mission forward. And just to put that into perspective, this surplus is here because our massive total receipts, over 843,000 pesos, have safely outpaced our total expenses of roughly 801,000 across these first 7 months. It is a fantastic testament to the sustained faithfulness of this congregation. They are literally keeping the lights on for both our primary ministries and our secondary operations.
Okay, moving on to our next area, cash flow seasonality trends, or as I like to think of it, navigating our financial tides. Now, while that year-to-date surplus is absolutely fantastic, it does kind of mask a pretty wild month-to-month reality. We essentially rode a financial roller coaster to get here, a series of severe seasonal spikes and dips. We hit some incredible peaks with strong surpluses in April and June, but those were followed very closely by some deep, challenging valleys where we ran deficits in February, May, and July. Obviously, this kind of extreme seasonality requires us to navigate very carefully.
Which brings us right into dissecting those deficits so we can really understand what's happening down in those valleys.
So, you're probably wondering, and it's the absolute crucial question we have to ask ourselves right now, why did July end with a massive 37,000 peso deficit, especially since it was an incredibly successful month that brought in record-breaking receipts of over 273,000 pesos? Like, how on earth does a church take in that much money in a single month and still end up in the red?
Well, taking a really close look at the July disbursements reveals the absolute culprits. 2 massive outliers totally derailed the month. We had a one-off 96,100 peso church anniversary expense paired with a 30,000 peso property tax payment. These enormous, unbudgeted lump sums literally wiped out the incredible gains we saw from the 90,000 pesos in special offerings we raised specifically for the new air conditioning units. It's practically a textbook example of how unbudgeted, lump sum expenses can completely derail what should have been a record-breaking month. And we actually see this exact pattern of non-recurring spikes driving the deficits in our other valley months too. For instance, February was hit hard by an 11,000 peso electricity bill and a 10,000 peso retreat subsidy. Then, May suffered a 19,000 peso utility bill right alongside a catch-up payment for SSS contributions. The vital takeaway here? Our normal day-to-day operations are absolutely not bleeding cash. These deficits are entirely driven by isolated administrative spikes.
Let's shift gears now to look at our ministry versus operation spending to check in on our structural balance.
When we zoom out to look at our everyday baseline spending, we are operating incredibly healthily. More than half of our budget, 51.2% to be exact, which is roughly 409,000 pesos, is going directly into our core primary ministries. That's our worship, discipleship, and worker salaries. The remaining 48.8% funds our operations, keeping the lights on, keeping the facilities clean. By actually slightly exceeding standard nonprofit benchmarks for core ministry allocation, we can be extremely confident that the underlying engine of our church is perfectly balanced.
Next up, we need to quickly talk about the March ledger discrepancy, in the spirit of radical transparency, of course.
Because as stewards, absolute transparency is literally our highest priority. So if there are any eagle-eyed reviewers out there looking at the raw first quarter records, you might have done some quick mental math and thought, wait a second, What happened to March's 8,020 peso electricity bill? It kind of looks like it just vanished into thin air.
So here is exactly what happened, and there is no need to panic. While that 8,020 peso electricity bill was perfectly and accurately inputted into the weekly columns of the ledger, it was accidentally omitted from the reported secondary and grand total expenses at the bottom of the sheet. Just a simple formula glitch. But, and this is the absolutely crucial part for our peace of mind, the final 11,839 peso net surplus formula for March remained entirely mathematically correct. The cash on hand perfectly matches reality. It was literally just a formatting hiccup with how the final expense cell pulled the data.
All right, finally, let's talk about strategies for financial stability so we can start future-proofing our finances.
Because we can't just sit here and observe the data, we've got to use it to smooth out our cash flow. Based on everything we've just looked at, we're proposing 3 structured steps. Step 1, establish an internal sinking fund. If we amortize our massive anniversary costs into an 8,000 peso monthly reserve, we completely eliminate that brutal July spike next year. Step 2, conduct energy audits. We absolutely need to strictly monitor the commercial efficacy of those new inverter AC units to make sure they're actually mitigating our seasonal utility spikes. And step 3, build a capital reserve. Establishing a 3-month, 200,000 peso operational cushion will easily absorb the shock of any future unexpected property taxes.
As we wrap up this explainer, the critical question for everyone on the leadership board is this. How will you champion these 3 stewardship steps in your respective ministries to protect our surplus and ensure lasting stability? The data has shown us exactly where we stand today. The action we take next is entirely up to us.